So as we all know, Fire Red and League Green recently returned to Switch, so what better way to reinvigorate the topic of the sprites, that sort of Pokemon era, by doing a tier list, of course, on the sprites that you can find in these games that are the most noteworthy, interesting, have some gripes, interesting experiences with them, just generally talk about some good old sprites. Because, as I've seen on the internet, some discourse and topics raised about it, you've probably seen too, why not just use the occasion to talk about these once again. So starting, of course, with the most iconic three, either they're because they're stars or just look so good in their form they are. Honestly, easy Triple S, because first of all, we need to remember that the limitations of just maximum 16 colors, and 2 of them are just black and used for the background to make them transparent in the games. Let me show what I mean. Like we see here in a sprite, my Spring go-to program, this is the size that each sprite has room to be used in, which is 64 by 64 pixels. So taking that into consideration and the sizes of these designs, we can see it barely fitting already in here, along with the palette limitations, which is 16 colors. Like I mentioned, the first is the transparent, aka background. In the games itself, it usually uses a different color, so that the game, you know, like basically chroma keys it out. Then, of course, white and black is like the default for all the designs, because like 90% of them use those colors. So you get left with 13 colors. And taking all that into consideration, and the still dynamic poses of the sprites, which I think is the main appeal for this era of graphics, honestly, I don't see any other better way that this could have been done. So that is why I place these 3 into S tier. Pretty self-explanatory. Now, as for something that could be a bit more weird, unexpected for this list, and of course, I'm mentioning now, this also includes the back sprites and the icon sprites. I know they are way more Pokemon I could discuss, but these are the most interesting, you know, just to not drag it out. Now, Metapod, as for what reason it ended up here, is for the variety. Oh, okay, whatever. Is for the variety of poses, shapes it's in. Like for the front sprite, clearly it's downwards with the spikes on its head going backwards, same as the icon, but here it's on its tummy, stomach, abdomen area, I don't know what to call it. In the icon, it's standing on its tip of its tail, but in the back it's leaning sidewards and it looks much more deformed. What I'm trying to say is, if I can find the sprite, I have example sprites for all of them. Okay, so here we go. As we can see here, just basically move this eye to here, and it could be a face of its own. As for here, it's pretty dynamic. It's pretty already like explanatory what's going on here. Here it either looks like a nose or just a small nub, but here it's a spike. And for the icon, once again, what I'm trying to say is, basically I'm stalling even more than a Metapod using Harden versus a Metapod using Harden. But I just think the main quirkiness of the sprites, okay, Gen 4, Gen 5, they get pre-polished, there's almost 0 to none issues with any of the details, anything like that. But Gen 3, first time getting full colors like this on the Game Boy Advance, 64 by 64, a new time for Pokemon sprites after the GSC and Red Blue Yellow era. But for this quirkiness, yeah, it's, I mean, at the end of the day, it's still a Metapod. But another topic that I'll raise with Kangaskhan later on is that you feel like you get a whole new Pokemon when you catch them finally and use them on your own, you, instead of like how it's now, with 3D models, you just need to make a model and that's it. No need for a separate model for the back sprite, like how it was up to Gen 5, where there were multiple sprites necessary for both views. And here you get a Metapod, you roam out, and it's like you almost see a whole new, well, you literally see a whole new perspective of Metapod, but in general, with all the Pokemon. Which goes for the next topic as well, which is Pidgey. And the sole reason I mentioned Pidgey is because of a one small single detail on its back sprite, on its leg. The white fluff, or whatever it is. Now, when you look at Pidgey, nothing white. Okay, interesting context perspective. And of course, the other topic of some, of course, they get into a new phase of sprites, visuals. Most of the efforts would be made easier if you just re-sprite the old sprites. Okay, that makes sense. And also it's just cool to see a new revision. But still, that doesn't answer when has ever there been a white fluff around Pidgeys. Right, like I know it's such a niche, small, nothing burger of a topic to mention, but there always were random quirks with the older sprites, and it just seems funny that even with, you know, just a whole resprite, you retouched, remade the whole design, you know, even the shading is different, yet you still kept this random one niche detail about Pidgey that, yeah, I know it's meaningless, and here, you know, it's just part of the body with the same coloring, but randomly white here. It's just such a small, random, nothing thing, but after you consider that every sprite was handcrafted, you know, pixel by pixel, every pixel is intentional, and they added white fluff in the leg, where in no other form of Pokemon media till that time you could have seen something like that on it. It just seems so funny. And yeah, hey, okay, maybe the sprite. Okay, it's pretty dynamic. And another thing about I love the sprites is the more you see of the body, the more it makes it feel like a smaller Pokemon. You know, it probably would be vice versa. Like Kangaskhan, Swampert, FRLG all take a lot of space with their back sprite. That means they're pretty big. But with the same logic, if you manage to get the whole Pokemon in the back sprite, and basically the only thing cut off is either its legs or like a snippet of its right wing, then it also makes it feel very small at the same time. Just the philosophy behind sprites, I love it. And for even the same old Pidgey, and that the discussion it can bring out with just a small thing, you know, just redoing them, still keeping such a nothing detail that's only existed in this sprite and Gold, Silver, Crystal, but those both exist just because they were redone later on. It's very, very quirky, to say the least. But still, keeping on the topic of quirky, Arbok. Now, it's pretty simple sprite. It's something special, right? You know, Arbok in itself, it's just literally Cobra but backwards. And assign the elements of the Pokemon world. Like, this is definitely a thing you can see in the real world because, you know, Cobras exist. And it is poisonous, so, you know, poison type. Literally just making an animal into a Pokemon. But what makes this special is the special element of Arbok that it only had in the earlier games. Now, if we take a look once again at the Fire Red sprite, you know, same thing as the official art, as we saw, right? Big eye marks, mouth, like eyebrows, nothing truly special. But if we look at the Emerald sprite, we can see a difference between the faces. I mean patterns. I'm afraid I fell for the trap. Different eye pattern, mouth, eyebrow, okay, interesting. Which is almost similar but still different compared to Johto's, yep, GSC's versions. Flame-like eyes, more crystallized, like sharpened mouth, basically fire green, but a little less variety, since, you know, Johto and Kanto right next to each other. Which I'm mentioning is because, okay, moving on, it stays like the Kanto version. But in the first 3 generations, it had a separate pattern based on the region it's in. Basically, one of the first regional forms, without it actually, you know, being the regional form, regional variant. And even in the very first games, it had W's on its back, but, you know, red, blue, yellow, that's kind of expected. But with this, once again, something just you won't see again. And I just think it's very cool. The idea of, you know, there's male, female, gender differences. There's, you know, small differences that just change between the generations themselves. Like, you know, the W or other Pokemon. Small stuff like that. But getting exclusive stuff like this just makes it feel that much more special. And it's a really big shame that I got left behind. But, you know, I don't think most people know or knew about this. And, you know, always having that cool, quirky fun fact in the back is always going to be fun. Especially with such a small thing like that. But returning to the mention of you can feel the scale based on how much the Pokemon is in the frame is Paris. Because this always has been kind of weird, quirky Pokemon. In a weird way. I mean, it has its lore of being a Pokemon that's controlled by the mushroom on its back. Like we see in the Pokédex entries, a host-parasite pair in which the parasite mushroom has taken over the host bug. You know, starts out with an infected bug and becomes just a victim to a parasite. Okay, so it's gonna be pretty creepy, uneasy feeling. So what do you do to unintentionally maybe make it feel a bit more ickier, creepier? Okay, so we have the standard of top half of the Pokemon, you know, be on the screen to have more space for details. But for Paris, basically having all of its body on the screen is gonna feel uneasy, you know, unusual. You're used to the regular format, like I mentioned, top half, not everything from the body, like it's in Gen 5, for example. But instead, here comes Paris, basically like kneeling over the top of the text box and being a creepy crawly that it is, and it just even so, if like beautified, basically everything on the body is visible on the back. Okay, it makes sense, it's flying, it's small, it's a butterfly, but for such a small thing to still get on the screen, even though it definitely would be smaller than like shorter than FRLG's knee or something, it's just weird elements of the philosophy that help it make grosser, you know? But it's still not fully unique, but enough to still end up here. And I just wanted to mention that. But also mentioning special quirks about the sprites. I mean, I'm doing it for every one of them. This whole video is for that. Nidoking, specifically, okay, it's pretty fearsome, it's pretty bulky. Once again, it has the problem of, you know, 64 by 64, trying to fit such a big design into that format. But what is so special about this instance? As you maybe can tell from the official art, and then comparing with the sprites, it feels like with every generation, it became less and less fierce. Like compare the bulkiness of Hard-Gold, bulkiness, spikiness, Fire Red, the fierceness, and go into the 3D modeler. It feels like so duller, like a dull knife. You just grinded it down. And also, basically, there was a grittier feel about the older games. And I feel like Nidoking is one of the best examples for this, because it definitely, even just between Emerald, Fire Red, Since Fire Red, I'm pretty sure was before Emerald, you know, just passing on with time. Just make them more simpler, easier to animate, maybe. There are a whole lot of assumptions you can make, like, oh, maybe you just, you know, reducing on the details could help for future spriting, making the models and whatnot. That definitely could be true. But my point just for this was, you know, everything felt more grittier, different. Once again, different age for the visuals. Time to try something new. Here, for example, previously they were also small enough Pokemon to just take the silver, crystal, gold back sprites, like Pidgey was for example, and just recolor them. But now, since the pixel size has grown bigger, they could also just take the small sprites and just add more details onto them. Which, yeah, just was an improvised point right now, but that also is a factor. And just continuing on with the same point is Machop, which is way more lankier, leaner, and whatnot else. Basically what we know him. But throughout, like, many first generation Pokemon, they had their growing patches in the first generations. Like, look at this Machop. You can make a Quagmire joke with the left hand only thing, and those who know will know. But it always had super weird proportions, and just suddenly in Gen 4 it all got figured out and stayed like that, how it is today. But it's still pretty fun to look back at, you know, where they were versus they are now. And along with Nidoking, Machop feels like one of those Pokemon that has changed the most. Even not just from the first generation, because that's basically cheating, all of them have changed since Red and Blue. But still, from Fire Red there were a lot of things that ended up changing. And I think it's cool to look back. But it's still the least, like, interesting one. And while I can still beat a dead horse, let's lastly mention Victory Bell as well. Because, you know, it's a bulbier, water balloon-like composition it has. But here, it's more of a... what do you even call it? It kind of looks like a Twinkie. I know, the body composition. And once again, Gen 4 finally figured their shit out and went on with that. Grew its belly. But here, it went leaner. It's realized it has to reduce its belly before, you know... Nah, it wasn't the summer release. I was... want to be quirky. Basically, what I'm saying is... before different, now the one we know. AKA, just another comparison for what I already mentioned with Nidoking and Machop. Kind of killed the topic. But switching up a bit is some icons, which is interesting because, okay, front sprites have their own philosophy. Get as much compact or wrangle around in different shapes to fit in. We'll talk about that with Gyarados later on. But with... yeah, okay, not now Gyarados. Like Lickitung here, for the icons in general, the main focus they had was outside of them being twice as smaller and twice as little colors. Let me show once again. Okay, so opening them in the sprite editor once again, we can see that, okay, Aggron, I'll discuss that later. Metapod already discussed. The main focus is to, you know, you open the menu, you see the Pokemon, the main focus that needs to be achieved is that the player recognizes who the hell is this? So whether you do that by making a good enough design that without colors you can tell who that is. Like, okay, don't cheat, you just saw the sprite bed. I mean, which Pokemon is this? Ah, it's Metapod, because you can tell of the body composition. And, of course, the other half is getting the main colors, right, and all of that. But Licitang's head isn't that big usually, right? Its tail practically not there, even though the usual design basically is kinda as big as the body itself. And the tongue is definitely way more out. So, what is the exact thinking behind designs like this for the icons? Well, I didn't pick Lickitung for no reason, as I think it shows all of the aspects perfectly for what goes into an icon. First of all, the posing of it. Instead of, you know, being like a Pokemon sprite that is facing frontwards to the front, however you want to call it, the icons look to the side while kind of being rotated to the side, like leaning to the side. And that is because obscuring half of the body, you know, makes it much easier to work with the size limitations of 32 by 32. And also, it helps to make the main core details and philosophy of each Pokemon's design much more visible. Like, we don't need all of the tongue, all of the tail, all of the body to know this is Lickitung, right? Especially for a bigger design. Now Metapod, it's small enough, it's simple enough, we just can do it from any other glance. Like, it wasn't in the rotated, side-leaning pose as is Lickitung. But here, as long as you get the main colors, for example, let's just remove, let's keep the pink and red. Still, we can tell it's Lickitung, right? Move another pink. Move the other gray. Still can tell it's Lickitung. So what I'm saying, once again, like for the fourth time, goddamn it, Retro, just say it how it is. As long as the main color, main 2 or 3 identifying features of the whole design is there, there's no need to make it complex. Because let's remember, what's the place you see these sprites? You see these sprites only in the party screen for the most part. I mean, you see them in training too, but that's way less often. So, you know, we just saw it, dedicated screen to it, zoomed up, all of that. But just besides, maybe if you haven't nicknamed them or what, they are the second identifiers for which Pokemon is which. So why would you need to get it as detailed as possible if the sole goal is getting it to be in a recognizable state, so the player knows? And I think Pokemon like Lickitung do it perfectly. And yeah, probably the most I'll ever speak about Lickitung till this point, or ever again. But yes. Now Goldeen and Seeking, still relating to the topic of simplicity for the icons, yet it's still in a bit different direction, is the simplicity being taken to the max. If we copy and paste I don't think I need to explain it, because, okay, but I'll still do. Let's move it to the side for easier comparison and add this in. Let's remove this, oh, okay, maybe this ain't useful. Okay, and yeah, I don't think we really need this. And if we now take it and line it, basically the same identical pose. What I'm saying with this, okay, yeah, you can say something like, oh, Game Freak was lazy from the start. But what I'm trying to say is that, really, it's all about doing it easier and not needing to change things for the sake of changing. If we remember, it's an icon at the end of the day, and it's still the same Pokemon. And even if Seeking is bigger than Goldeen, the same body composition still applies, and we get everything from that pose to also apply to seeking and make the player recognize that it's seeking. Just change the colors, move it a bit around, and even if the body is still identical, the pixels are basically identical too. It's still pretty impressive. How would you call it? How various you can get with the designs, sprites, Pokemon, even with all these restrictions, and still sharing the same things. I don't know. Okay, I'm just dragging on. But yeah, just thought a fun small tidbit. But that goes the same for Staryu and Starmie. Now that you saw my example that I showed, I think you can see it pretty good. Just extend the yellow bits a bit more by a sprite. Add in the small nibs, starfins here, change the color, and it's the same thing. Same thing. So yeah. Now, moving on to what basically sparked the idea for this is Kangaskhan. Now, fun fact, don't know if you knew this, but Kangaskhan is a parent Pokemon. It has a small baby Pokemon. Basically the whole, special thing about it. Besides, once again, being from GSC Resprite and added on top with, the new space and all that. And only happening in these two generations, Gen 3 and Gen 2, and really not ever again, is this. Which I fully agree with this, so this is why I wanted to mention it, is that one of the things I miss from 2D Pokemon games is the feeling of satisfaction from finally getting to see the back sprite of a Pokemon you fought really hard to catch. Because you see a whole new perspective of it, and I think Kangaskhan shows this the best, because when you compare it to the front sprite, okay, it's looking like it's ready to attack. Kind of aggressive, all that, but once you battle it, you catch it, you tame it, and have it on your team, it's like it's grown attached to you, it's familiar with you, it acknowledges you as a reliable, trustful person, and now you can see its more friendlier side, with, being more safer, instead of keeping it safe in its pouch, having the baby resting in its arms on its shoulder. And, besides it being charming as a concept, as a visual itself, the whole concept of, philosophy, feeling that once you catch a Pokemon and get to use it on your own, you see a whole new perspective of it. Double meaning intended. So yeah. And returning to the previously mentioned about pressing the max possible out of the restrictions is Gyarados. Because, let's look at this. 16 colors to the max. Every single color is used efficiently. Red bright eyes, signifying anger. I mean, open mouth, I guess you could call that angry, unless it's hungry. But I mean, you can be angry, well, okay. And basically taking up as much as possible with the 64 by 64 spacing. And also, since you can make this even more darker, just take a more darker gray, blue, and color that in here, so you can apply the, further being the furthest away from the screen, instead of you just reuse the outline to give that shadow effect. Gyarados just being Gyarados, the fact that it's so big in scale and still fits in and works perfectly on such screen, it's pretty cool. I don't know, it's really Gyarados. Anything related to it is pretty cool. But yeah, it's still not as super hype or interesting as the S tier topics, I think, but it's still pretty interesting. Now, for a different topic, I guess, yeah, you could say that, is the Steelix sprite, which weirdly standed out to me while I was browsing all the sprites, because it's one of the very few slim sprites that feels like that is from a later generation. Like, compare this sprite to Diamond. Okay, the pose is pretty similar, sure. The colors are pretty similar, sure. But that's the whole point. Because looking at Nosepass, for example, it looks pretty washed out. You know, the later generations have more sharper outlines with the black, more vibrant colors. Also looking with this interesting example later on, it's pretty similar colors, kind of washed out, not the most vibrant. But Steelix, not only judging by the fact that it's been reused in the later generation as the basis for the sprites, with way more space once again, 80 by 80, still keeping the 16 by 16 colors. I just think it's really neat. I don't know, of course, at what stage each sprite was made. But this wasn't another case of, you know, respriting from Gold, Silver, Crystal. And comparing even with these in the same tier, like compare with Victory Bell. They do not feel like from the same generation at all. Now, that is the point I'm trying to make here. That they not fully figuring out the direction they're going with the sprites kind of feels like plays here. Either they go for more brutal, more sharper, aggressive designs, vibrant, colorful, simple, still recoloring, maybe reusing sprites from the previous generation, or going for a whole new philosophy maybe near the end. It's just the all-around mishmashy feeling that I really like about Fire Red Leaf Green. Now, Nosepass, what could possibly Nosepass have interesting to be talked about? Now, except, of course, it looks very, very different the next generation, but that's still understandable, because, you know, it's just been existing for a generation at that point, is the fact that I think this is the one of the most misunderstood sprites. Like, not, oh, this is such a great sprite, guys, you don't know, but in the sense that it's been looked at incorrectly. And what do I mean by that? Well, of course we know this is his hand, right? This is its leg, and this is the other leg, you know, like facing upwards. Well, what if I told you that this could look like, you know, the neck? See? Like a neck. Okay. And this could be the mouth, like whistling. And this is like an ear. Okay. I didn't see it that much myself, but when I made the visual example for myself as well, oh my god, I see it. And this kind of also looks like, you know, an eyebrow. Not as much. I'm overdoing it. But yeah, basically, that just looks like a dude now. But yeah, the point I'm making is that, of course, since it's a sprite, it's not a 3D model. It only has its single frame to make an impression with. And if you just saw it a little bit differently compared to other people, you could get a whole different understanding from this Pokemon. Once again, another aspect of sprites that I love very much. And Nosepass is the best example of misunderstanding overlooking sprites. So, S tier. And speaking of overlooking, or maybe just being in a different mood that entice you to a different perspective, is probably, yeah, I would pretty surely say that this is the most popular Gen 3 sprite. Need I say more? One cheek with a shine, second cheek, facing back, it's back to you. I mean, one and done deal. Moving on, next we have is the opposite of Kangaskhan, where from the front, okay, you see everything. They have the 64 by 64 dimensions to use with. to give you the whole impression, to sell you on this design. And usually when you get to see it from the back, okay, you just get even more. It's like a sweet reward from catching this Pokemon. But in Piloswine's case, I mean, if you somehow didn't get to see the front and never opened the summary screen, you basically can just say you got a boulder. So yeah, complete opposite. But next up, Swampert. No, I don't really have any gripes with Swampert. I mean, personally, I always choose Sceptile, then maybe sometimes Blaziken, and never Swampert, because, you know, Hoenn kind of goat like that. It has enough goats to go around. I just pick my favorite goat. So, all's well, all's good. And, you know, front sprite, pretty simple too. Actually, comparing to the others, yeah, it's pretty nice. Kind of has the Pikachu effect of slimming down the next generation. But, basically, the whole thing that's kind of messed with me for Swampert is that I really don't mesh well with the back sprite. Like, I don't hate it, but like, comparing with Soul Silver here, pretty simple, okay. It's standing upwards, hands leaning down. But here, especially after a certain horror game recently came out, this looks like just such a hunch. Like, Swampert having a hunchback, because either it's really leaning on its right shoulder with its head, or I just get reminded of this lady, clerk, shopkeeper from No I'm Not Human. Don't know if you know, but yeah, niche reference. For that, I mean, it's not really that special outside of that anyways. Now, Beautifly. God, I almost called it just a butterfly. Okay. I mean, kind of is. Okay, anyways. The same topic of Paris, kind of with Pidgey. Feeling the scale in a weird, ironic, poetic sense, based on how much you see of the Pokemon. Okay, Salamence, pretty big. As we can see, only the head. Okay, that makes sense. So big it's obscured by the text box. Makes sense. Now, Beautifly, technically, it's also very big. In fact, the sprite itself is bigger than Salamence's. But everything fits on the screen, nothing is obscured, so it's gonna feel smaller. And I think Beautify is the perfect example in these older generations, because even so, if Paris basically fits everything into the screen, Beautify is not only also in the screen, but its whole wings, and it even is elevated a few pixels up. So yeah. Still way more said about Beautify than I think anyone else has said. But Salamence, another feature, just my personal most overlooked sprite. That's the sole reason I'm mentioning it right now. When I saw this multiple times as a kid, I don't know what I was thinking, but this side view of the wing, okay, it's pretty clever for them, you know, much less work to do, just the very line of the wing from the side, you can just draw it and that's it. But as a kid, when I saw it, it for some fucking reason looked like a red, you know, like, vein. And I never really understood what was going on. Like, okay, it looks like it has something like hair vein going over it. But when I look at it from the front, it doesn't have anything like that. Okay, maybe it's this, that thing. Basically, I was a stupid kid, is what I'm saying. And yeah, you know, nostalgia sells, so hate it. And now we get left with some icons, except the ones I already covered but forgot to turn off. Yes, no reason. I mean, no surprise. Shit happens. Okay. Now, Grovyle is an unusual case in the sense of being used. Oh my god, I can't find the page. Okay, there we go. For the icons being used in an interesting way to make a Pokemon from a certain line feel more diverse. Now, what do I mean by this? If we go to the icon sprites, Trico, dark green. Sceptile, dark green. I mean, of course, they're always gonna have a majority of their design be similar to each other, because, you know, same shared line, grass typing, all that, can be super diverse. But even if you easily can do the same thing with the same palette these two have, for Grovyle, they used different coloring to make it feel much more diverse. Now, the interesting thing about icons is they don't have this one big pool of colors, or that you can use any colors. No. To, you know, since they still needed to be on cartridges and the size really couldn't be more like 16 megabytes, something like that, they needed to compact as much data as possible. And for the icons, they basically had a limited pool of colors they could use. So that is why a lot of them have similar coloring. Like, basically, the colors you see on... What can I use an example? Like, yeah, basically Lotad's coloring is here. Same as Trico. Or Tyranitar. I think more like Tyranitar. But yeah. Most of the sprites share the same colors and have different palettes. Yet they still use the different one for Grovyle. And even if its design on its own is different, yes, and they use the same color, it still would stand out. They use the whole different coloring to make it feel more unique. Which is pretty cool, taking in consideration that it's just an icon. And leaving the two kinda anticlimactic ones for last is removing details for the sake of keeping readability and making the Pokemon identifiable. Because, like, let's look at Torkoal here. Basically, anytime you see Torkoal is gonna have this smoke cloud. But here, nothing. But if we think about it... Okay, so here's Torkoal. We add in its smoke cloud, right? Take into consideration the perspective it has. And let's draw in the cloud. Fill this in. Okay, let's pretend it's filled in. Add some, maybe, cloud details quickly. Okay, so, yeah, by face, you can still tell it's Torkoal. But the other part, which is the bright shell and the big smoke cloud, how do you decide which one do you keep? Because those two are pretty important parts to Torkoal's design, you know, the shell, the smoke cloud. So which one do you keep? Is it the weird, readable one that doesn't really have an outline and is kind of uninteresting? Or do you keep the more identifiable in such a small frame design? I think it's pretty clear. And for... Oh, I still have this. And for Aggron, has no tail. Head, pretty fucking massive. So, if we made it much more smaller, something like this, and add in a tail, could probably be something like this. I don't know, it probably had some white parts, like here. It gets a bit more messier, so remove the tail, make the head bigger, and it's way more readable. And the last, yeah, just another topic for sprites done. I don't know, I just wanted to do some opinion sharing. Really love tier lists, you know, favorite Pokemon, discussing stuff like that, you know, and I don't want to do it on the main channel. So there's something like this. You have ideas or suggestions for something similar, I don't know, comment it, whatever. Yeah. See you.